Hey, my friends. So I have thoughts to share, as I do. I was chatting with a friend of mine about sort of going pro, and essentially, when readers were ready to start charging money for readings, and I thought, well, who cares what I think? But then I do have some insights into life, and I thought I would share them. The first thing I'll share actually is this book is out of print, but if you can find a copy of it, you should be able to do so pretty cheaply. This is Professional Tarot by Christine Jetty, and it's a great, great book. It's a little dated, of course. It was published, I mean, not that long ago, but long ago, 2003. So long enough ago that a lot of technology has changed dramatically in the years since. And but I do recommend. There's just like the fundamentals of business are really good in there, and that's, I think, definitely worth getting your hands on, even if, like, we're a little more ahead of the curve technologically. GPS and cell phones and all of those things have changed quite a bit, and the ability to affordably and easily open a shop online and sell, like, all of that sort of was a little more complicated, um you know 13 years ago. But I do recommend it. So if you can, and I sort of wish Llewellyn might, like, commission an updated version of this, because it really is a good book. So what I want to talk about are just some thoughts I have about charging for readings, and thoughts I have about why I do, and the idea of business. So personally, I'll just tell you that I started charging for readings principally because people told me that, hey, your time is valuable. You give a lot of tarot content away. You're occasionally giving away readings to folks who want them. Even if you don't want to start a business, you owe yourself, after your years of experience and the amount of time that you spend doing this, you owe yourself to at least be compensated for your time. And so when I set up my little shingle on Etsy, that was my only motivation, and it still really is. I love reading for others. I love doing readings. I But it's not my job. You know what I mean? I have a day job, and I really do sort of compensate, or ask for compensation for my time. And that was ultimately why I did what I did. It wasn't an ambition of mine. In fact, I don't know how I would support myself, and pay health insurance and all of that with, just that. Now, I don't advertise, I don't do all of that, so this really isn't going to be about the business side of things. And in fact, I think that what you want to do first off, if you want to start making a business out of something that you care about, is you want to seek out the advice of a business person. I mean, that ultimately is, like, whether it's a book, whether it's like Small Businesses for Dummies or whatever, that, like, you're actually connecting with someone who knows not the business side of tarot necessarily, or divination as a career, but the business side of small businesses, particularly small businesses that have a high failure rate, which, these do. And obviously, you need to know the laws in your area around them. And there are still some strange and arcane ones on the books, but you can go and read stories about how readers have been trapped or screwed legally because of arcane laws that are brought up because some, religious right winger comes along and decides to do the Christ-like work of ruining someone's financial health. So, just, you want to know those two things. Like, you need to know business, you need to know the laws, neither of which I can help you with in that case. And nor should you look necessarily to someone on YouTube who makes videos about tarot for business advice. If you are going to do that, then I would look to someone who has a proven track record, to use sort of a corporate interview term, of having a sustainable and profitable business. Now, in my sort of sphere of knowledge, I can only think of one person who is able to support themselves entirely from their tarot work, and it's not just from readings. They teach, they do conferences, etc. And that's Ethany. But I can't think of anyone else whose sole career is that I know personally and who I trust. I know a lot of folks who have a tarot business and who do it because they enjoy it, and they supplement their income with it, and maybe make quite a fair, supplemental income that way. But again, many of those folks aren't just doing readings, they're teaching, they're doing workshops, and they're invested in the business of their brand, which is something that, I don't do a very good job at. And it's one reason why I don't have more clients. It's one reason why I don't have a career as this, because I do have a day job, and I do have another branch of my career as a writer, and all of those things sort of have to commingle, and I don't have at this time the bandwidth to invest in my brand. But that's something you really have to consider. But I think Ethany is a good example of someone who is able to and has done all of that. But again, I think if you think about how many of us are out there in the world as readers who are doing YouTube, who have a fair audience, who have a small client base, very few of us are actually able to make this our jobs, even if we wanted to. And I think you just have to be aware of the reality of what it means to have a niche market, to have a niche skill, and the kind of global community of the internet has made it easier for everyone who wants to do that, which means that it's harder to sort of get through the noise, and to build an audience, and to get people's attention, and to make it clear why they should choose you as a reader when you're charging whatever you're charging over someone else, and maybe someone who has a brand and a reputation that precedes them. It's not an easy thing. And of course, then you also have to deal with the reputation of diviners as frauds and hucksters, etc. So all of those are things you have to consider, I think, from a purely practical standpoint. And the other thing I would say too is that there are people out there who will run classes, free classes, that will tell you how to start a business. And just from a curiosity standpoint, I've attended at least one or two of those, and they're nonsense. You know what I mean? From my perspective, I think, frankly, if someone has that level of business acumen, they're probably not going to give it away because they understand business. And they're also probably not going to lure you into some sort of introductory thing that is questionable in my opinion. So, those are practical things you have to consider. I think that it's expensive to run a small business. I think that in the United States, certainly the systems are designed to favor corporations, and certainly as someone who works for a large one, as an employee, I know that I'm going to have health insurance and vacation time, partially, made available to me by my company. Now, you can get into all sorts of theories about capitalism and whatnot, but my guess is that if you're watching this, and you're thinking about starting a business, you have at least some interest in capitalism because you're trying to make money on something. It's easier for large companies to afford health insurance and pay time off and all of those other benefits that really should be things we all just get. But it's harder as a small business to do those things. And even if you're a sole proprietorship, if you're your own entity, I think something you have to consider carefully is, do you have the ability to pay, for individual health insurance, like at least $600 a month? Some states may require you to have small business insurance or other coverage, and there's advertising costs. I just went to Wix to sort of do some work on my website and say, can I buy a domain? And there's like a cost. It's a pretty heavy cost for, your domain and the maintenance there. There's all of these little things that you have to consider, that, if you want to make something your career or your job and it's your full-time gamble, then you are going to be shelling out more than you're getting, until you have an audience, and that's something to consider too. So, I mean, those are all practical things. When you work for yourself, there's no paid time off. If you have a sick day, if you have clients on that sick day, if you cancel them, they may not come back, if unless you have built a reputation with them. If you cancel them, that's a day's income lost. In the United States, certainly you are recommended, I think, and again, like, you need to talk to tax pros, etc., something like 40% of your income, your total income, to put that aside for taxes. So that's almost half of your income that you're putting aside to pay for your taxes. And clearly you want to do that because you don't want to go to jail. So these are all things that are, it's like having a small business and starting it up and making it work is expensive. And if you want it to be your only gig, these are things you have to think about. But I want to talk about a couple other things a little more specifically that I have personal experience with. And one of them is the idea of that if this cliche of, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I've talked about this before, I think, but that's false. That's a myth. If you do something you love, you will work every day and you will work harder. Because it's something that you love and you're passionate about, and that's good. But it also means that you're more susceptible to burnout because you're putting so much energy into a thing, and certainly for the beginning of anything, you're going to be not getting very much back. That's a thing you really have to be careful of, and you really have to be aware of. People who get into work that they love are more susceptible to getting sick and to burning out because of the amount of effort it takes. And in niche fields like this one, it's hard, it's an uphill slog. And most people, I mean, there's just like the sad reality of how this world works. Most people who try will fail, at least at first. And, it's certainly going to favor folks who have money in the bank. Or may have, a spouse or partner who is willing to foot the bill while they build a brand and an audience. Those things are real. Having money makes it easier to make money. That's a sad reality, again, of the world we live in. All of those things are business, but then there's like the emotional cost of that, and when you're like really trying to take something that you're passionate about and make it your job, it's not easy. And those failures are going to feel more personal and more hurtful and more devastating because of your investment in the work that you do, because it's not just a thing that you're interested in, it's a thing that you love. And so those failures are going to feel tough. They're going to hurt. You're going to have to work long hours. You're going to have to hustle more. And that takes a toll on you. And you don't have vacation time and you don't have health insurance that you're getting from an employer, unless you're lucky enough to have someone who can be your financial support while you do that. Not everyone does. I am a double income household, but I am the principal breadwinner in my life right now. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't. I don't have the luxury, and that is a luxury, and people who have that are probably going to succeed more. I don't want to discourage folks, but I want to sort of present a reality of like what it is that we do and what it means to do it for pay. And to have realistic expectations. All right. So you are likely to burn out more if you do something you love, because you have to work harder to make that work valuable to others. Just because we love something doesn't mean it's valuable to others. I'm a playwright. That's a third branch of my life, right? Nobody cares about theater. I write a lot. I enjoy writing it. But the thing that is devastating often is the inability to get that work into the world and to make anyone care about it. I mean, I have won awards. I have done great things as a playwright. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm owning my work. But I don't have a name people know. I don't have work that's getting produced in regional theaters or in New York. The competition is really high. It's easier if you have an endowment that lets you go to New York and hustle. It's easier if you were able to get into one of the major MFA programs that the famous writers in theater are coming out of. All of those are conditions that I have to face every time I tap the submit button on a piece of work that I've worked hard on and sent into the world. And you get used to rejections, but then sometimes you get an avalanche of rejections and it fucking hurts. And you're like, why am I doing this? If I were not trying to build a career as a writer, if I were just writing for me, that would hurt less. And there are times where I am obnoxious about my lack of success in an objective way, when if you, or in a personal way rather, where I think, other writers who haven't won the awards I have, etc., or placed in the things would say, wow, you're actually doing pretty well. Like all these things are subjective is the word I was reaching for there. And we have to define what success looks like in a way that makes sense. Which brings me to another thing that I think folks really need to care about, and maybe this is the single most important thing I'm going to say, is that getting paid for something doesn't serve as a mark that you're good at it. It's not a validation of your talent or skill. It's not something that sets you above. There are plenty of folks who get paid for things that they are terrible at, from CEOs to politicians to tarot readers. And I think it's important as a reader that while I think that anyone who does something they're passionate about and offers a service should receive compensation for that, I also think that for most of us, that's just not, it's not a possibility that's going to be our job. And we need to divorce our skill from the amount of money or the possibility of making money for it. To pull from theater again, I have a lot of friends, obviously, who are actors. There is, in much of the world, a union for stage actors. It's called Actors Equity. Many, many, many of my friends who are actors have yearned for their equity membership because they view it as a mark of having made it, of having arrived, of being a real actor. If you're not living in a major metropolitan area where theater is everywhere, and really, even if you are, the competition is high. And I have a lot of friends who are union actors who aren't doing any work now. They went from doing non-union work in small theaters to doing no work. Because, of course, once you're in the union, you can't take non-union work. That's the point of being in a union, right? You get the protections, and I'm not shitting on the union. I think it's a valuable thing. But if you are living in a place where there's no union theater, you can't do non-union work and stay in the union. So you might be shooting yourself in the foot unless you decide to pick up and move to Chicago or New York or London or one of the major theater centers in the world. And then you also have to accept the fact that if you go there, so is everyone else, and the competition is high. So while I'm a believer in unions and I believe in the actors union, right, you also have to consider whether the time is right, whether your career is in the right place, and separate yourself from the fact that there are really good actors out there who are working in small theaters for a little bit of money, and there are some really shitty actors out there who are working in union theaters for a lot of money relative, So talent is not equal to paycheck. And again, we should all be able to make a living doing something that we love, but that's not possible for most of us, and we have to be able to divorce our ego from our paycheck. Now, that's a real side effect of the world that we live in, right? Our value is principally determined by most of the world by the amount of money we bring in. Our value to our employers is that we are producing revenue for them. Or, like in my case, I work in corporate training. My value is based on the money I save by either making training better or faster, or preventing something that would be costly down the line. So like I work in like a preventative cost way, but my value is based on the amount of money I'm saving the company. Like, love it or hate it, capitalism has taught us that our worth is defined based on the amount of money that we make doing something. But when it comes to anything, it's not an indicator of your skill. It's not an indicator of your ability to do it well. All it is an indicator of your ability to make money and your willingness to ask for it, and the acumen that you have. So it's an indicator of your financial skills, but it's not an indicator of your reading skills. And the reason I say that is because so many readers, and I was guilty of this too, feel like they're not real unless they're getting paid for those readings. And that's false. You can be a great, great reader who just does it for fun, or because you have that ability, or because you enjoy it. The second you monetize something, it becomes a job, it becomes a responsibility, and it's harder, you know? I do offer readings for I think a relatively affordable cost. When someone orders a reading from me, that shoots to the top of all my priorities. It doesn't matter how I'm feeling emotionally, physically. It doesn't matter if I'm in the mood to read that day, if I'm feeling myself. It means that that person has bought a reading from me. They are paying me to do it. They jump to the top of my to-do list that day. And if it's a written reading, I try to have it within 24 hours. If it's a video reading, I try to have it within 48 hours. That means that that person has just become my priority any time of day, whether I'm vacation or not, unless I close my shop for a vacation, right? Which means that I'm not going to get that person at that point. I'm going to miss that opportunity. I have to decide those things. When you monetize something, it becomes a responsibility. And so the love turns into something different. You can still love the act of it, but it means that you are less in control of when and why you're doing it. And again, that feeling can lead you to burnout. So I just want to sort of really highlight the fact that just because someone gets paid for readings doesn't mean they're good at it. And just because someone doesn't get paid for readings doesn't mean they're bad at it. I absolutely, and I will say this to anyone who asks, this has not happened in the last 10 or 15 years. Well, 10 years. I've been reading for probably about 20. I have had a lot of paid readings that were bad prior to the last 10 years, when I learned that I should only really have readings from people whose work I know and trust. But again, see, that weeds out a lot of readers, because there's not a lot of readers I know and trust, because I have limited time and ability to meet people, right? And there's a lot of readers out there, and a lot of readers may want me as a client, hey, because I'd be willing to pay, but I'm only willing to pay people who I know and trust as good readers, at least in the last 5 or 10 years. There are a lot of people I've gotten readings from who have no business picking up a deck, and they're charging money for it. That's just an indication of their willingness to ask for money. Sometimes we equate someone's willingness to ask for money for ability, but that just means that they're comfortable asking for money, and a lot of us aren't. I've had amazing readings from people who do not ask for money. I had someone who I was coaching for a bit, and I put that in quotes because they were an incredible reader. They didn't need me. What they needed, I think, from me was for me to tell them how good they were, and they were. They read for me a bunch of times as practice readings, and they were incredible. And they don't charge for money, or didn't at the time, and had no ambition at that moment to do it. They were probably the best reader I've ever worked with, and they were not interested in charging money at that point. And I said, look, you're actually someone who's ready for this if you really want to. And they're like, no, I'm not ready. That to me is great, because when you're ready, when you're not. And this person knew that they weren't ready to handle the business side of things. It's one thing to do a reading for someone that you care about when they ask for it and when you're in the mood for it. It's another thing to do it when you're cranky and you had a long day at your other job, and someone wants to know about their love life, and you're like, oh fuck, another love life reading. Now, I actually don't mind doing love life readings, but I used to, and that was because I burnt out, and that was before I even charged money. So I was doing free readings for many years on the American Tarot Association free reading websites, and I loved doing it so much, but I did too much too fast, and I completely burnt myself out. Even though it was something I loved doing, I got so sick of is he cheating on me questions? Not that, but like that. And I was like, why do these fucking people only care about that? And what I didn't know was that that was a sign of burnout. I had been expending too much energy, and I had lost my empathy, and that's bad. And I actually had to take a couple years away from reading for others, and in some cases reading at all for long stretches of time, because I had lost the spark, and that I wasn't even being paid for it. That was just for fun and for practice. So burnout is real. These things happen. We have to take care of it. So it's a myth that if you do something you love, you won't work a day in your life, even if you're doing it for free. So just know that we have to measure the output and the input so that there's even give and take there, and that's so important. Finally, I think the thing I want to talk about is, how do you know you're ready? And that's a question I think that's different for everybody. But I think as a rule of thumb, I can tell you you're probably not ready to start charging um, within like a year of starting to learn. Now, there are adepts out there. There are people who can pick up a deck and just use it. Those people probably have a fairly advanced psychic ability. And I don't know many of those folks. I can't honestly think of anyone I know who has that, can just pick it up and like see. Certainly not me. In fact, I don't consider myself psychic at all. I know that there are folks out there who say everyone's psychic. That may be true, but I think there are people who have more connected, mechanisms. I think, there's a myth that everyone can sing. Sure, everyone can get in the car and rock out to the radio if they want to. Not everyone is Renee Fleming or Adele. Like those people are anomalies. And so, you may be someone who can open your mouth and sing like Adele. Most of us can't. Most of us require training and discipline and effort. And, even if you think about Adele, she has blown out her voice from not practicing, training and all of those things that singers really should do. She has damaged her vocal cords from like going full out. That's sort of like the singer version of burnout. I don't, I guess what I would say is like, you're at your most excited when you start learning something. And I think that means that we want to feel like we're ready. But we're not necessarily ready at that point. We're just feeling our oats. We're just feeling our fantasy. I would say, think about anything, any service you would pay for. And if someone told you I've been doing it for X amount of time, how would you feel about it? Now, I mean, we're not surgeons and we're not therapists, but there is an amount of counseling and thoughtfulness that's required to be a good and successful reader. It's not just about knowing what the cards mean and being able to say, oh, the Three of Swords means sorrow. You have to know how those fit together and how they answer a question, and you have to make sure you're actually answering the question. I have a lot of videos on that. That's really important to me. And to me, the hallmark of a really bad reader is someone who ends the reading and hasn't answered the question at all, or who pulls you away from the question you asked towards something that has nothing to do with anything you care about in most situations. And you can watch many of my videos on that. For qualifiers, I won't qualify it here. There are qualifiers. But I think, that to me is the hallmark of a good reader, is that you're able to actually answer the question in a satisfying way. Oh, lunch is here. Okay, lunch has been consumed. So yeah, you want to be able to answer the question in a satisfying way. I think that that's a key. I don't, I've talked about this before. I don't think that like accurate predictions is necessarily the hallmark of a great reading. I think the hallmark of a great reading is that it connects the question to the cards and then creates an answer that is logical, supported by the evidence that you have, which would be the things about the person you're reading for, the question they asked, and the cards you drew, and your experience with those cards. Because especially when it comes to predictive readings, things change. People make decisions. Life is weird. So, and people who get readings are not often able to accurately see the consequences of their actions. And so you might make a prediction that does or does not come true, either because the querent or the client changed their actions, or they don't see that what you said actually happened. So I don't think that judging your reading ability necessarily based on a percentage of accuracy is the right way to go. I think judging and I say that as someone who has decent accuracy. I don't track that. I check my work against my standards, which are that if you come to me with a question I have left you with an answer that makes sense given that question. Whether it's an explanatory answer, or a predictive answer, or an advice answer, that it makes sense based on the information that I have and the cards that are in front of me. And what you do with that is really up to you. But my job is that. And whether or not I say something that comes true has less to do about my reading abilities and more to do with the choices that the client makes after that. I may say, oh, you should do this, and I try to avoid using the word should because that seems very final, but just in this sort of offhanded way, you should try this. And then I may say, nah, and it works out anyway. Well, yeah, there's more than one way to achieve something, fine. That's not a reflection on my abilities as a reader. It's a reflection on the impulses that ignited in the reading for the person that I read for. I once remember sharing something I had written with someone, and they gave me this feedback that was so off base. It's like they hadn't even read the play. And I was really like, oh my God, I failed as a writer, and this, like, I'll never go to this person again. And then I realized, like, the writing had sparked something in them that wasn't what I intended, but it still sparked something. And so my job as a writer now is to go back and decide whether I liked what that sparked in them, or whether I wanted to try to get closer to the spark that I was originally intending. And I ultimately had to decide I can't control what something I write sparks. Only that I try to spark something. And like that's the thing about art, and I think that's the thing about a tarot reading, right? Is you want to try to spark something so that something is different at the end of it. Something has changed. A perception has shifted. No matter how big or how small. That's to me like what the tower is, in its most banal sense, is a perception shift. It is I didn't think about that before moment. And that shatters what you thought you knew. And it may not be the biggest thing in the world, but anyway, I'm going down another path. So how do you know when you're ready? I think only you know. I think you will get feedback from the people that you read for, and they'll say, hey, this is great, as I did with my friends who said, hey, look, it's time for you to at least charge for your time, And I know a lot of people who do that. I know a lot of people who are legit, dope, badass readers who do not make it their career. They charge for their time, and it just supplements their lives, and they enjoy doing it. And they've got a day job like me that supports their deck buying. I mean, that's another thing too. Like, you ain't going to be rolling in cash when you start a business, so you also ain't going to be able to go out, getting all the decks. Like, let's be honest about that too. Again, unless you've got a sugar daddy. So how do you know when you're ready? As I said earlier, like, think about a service that you would pay for. Again, probably not a doctor, because that requires years of schooling, and it's a different kind of service, although there may be people who would beg to differ. And in fact, there are people, and I admire this, who are tarot readers and who are nurses or doctors or have some kind of clinical training. I think that can go a long way, because we are dealing with people's mental health sometimes, and we have to be really aware of that. I think we have to, if you in order to know you're ready, you have to have an understanding of the consequences of a reading. We often will talk in the tarot world about whether third-party readings or health readings or legal readings are ethical. But I think the question isn't that. I think that's a question of taste and preference. To me, any reading is a question of ethics, because any reading can have an unintended consequence. And as a reader, I need to know that, I mean, to use just a super extreme example, you might say, hey, am I going to get some unexpected money, or am I going to get this payout I'm waiting for? And I say, yeah, you're going to get it. You're crushing it. And then they go out and like they poison a relative who they were going to like get inheritance from. Like, that's far-fetched, right? But like, any question can be benign and any question can be malignant. It just depends on the context. And oftentimes as readers, we don't know what that context is. Especially if, like me, you're doing a lot of distance readings where they're on video. We don't know what the consequences of our readings will be. And so, of course, it's important to provide those disclaimers when we read for others. But it's also important for us to understand that it's not just a health reading or a love reading or a is he cheating reading that might have unintended consequences. Any reading might. Every action has an equal opposite reaction. including a tarot reading. And so I think that you have to be prepared and understand that what you do or say in the course of a reading may trigger something you weren't anticipating. And most of the time it's a positive thing. Most of the time it's a perception shift, but that doesn't mean it's going to be all the time. So I think, knowing that it's not just about doing something you love, but doing something that has a consequence for the person on the other side of the table, whether that's face to face or virtual. We have to understand that our readings have consequences. And we want them to be perception shifts. We want them to be powerful, but we have to understand and have enough human empathy, I think, to do that, or at least have a clear brand that proves that we're not going to budge on what we say, and that your reaction is on you. And that may be a more flip way of interpreting, but I think Camellia Elias is someone who, if you read her stuff, if you look at how she reads, she's very clear. I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you what I see. And what I see may or may not feel right, and what I see may or may not feel good, but that's what I see, and I'm not here to take care of you in that way. And those aren't her words, but that's how I've interpreted her words. But that's her brand, right? She's made that clear. So that's not necessarily a reader I would reach for, although I've taken classes with her, and I think she's amazing, and her work has taught me a whole lot about how to be a really good reader. I don't approach my brand the same way, and my readings the same way. I do recognize that there is going to be an impact that I have some responsibility for, and I try to approach other human beings with humanity. I don't always have kind things to say. I don't always have good news, but I have humanity, and I try to. Whether or not they interpret that way is another issue, right? But I think we just have to understand all readings have consequences, and we have to know that. Would you suppose you have a buddy and she's like, I'm going to be a mechanic. I'll fix your car. And you're like, great. Like, what would you expect the exchange to be? Like, my expectation would be you want to be a mechanic. You're learning to be a mechanic. You're going to do this for experience, and maybe I'll pay you for parts. If my friend comes back and they're like, yeah, that's going to be like $400 an hour for labor, then I'm going to say, probably not so much, right? Because this person is not yet a mechanic. They are someone who is learning to be a mechanic. For that amount of money, I'm probably going to go somewhere where I know that these mechanics have experience, even though they may not be my friend. I may want to give my friend that experience, but I'm not going to pay $400 an hour for it. Again, that's an exaggeration, right? But like, would you hire you? If you were pulling a resume out, suppose you were hiring for a party or something, and you knew that your clients, your guests, whoever, your coworkers were going to have their impression of you in part affected by your choice to hire this reader for this event, would you look at their resume and seeing, 6 months of experience, would they be the top of your list? Would you hire you? I don't know how long it takes to become proficient at something. I don't think I started reading when I was 19 years old, which was 20 years ago. I don't think I felt fully confident as a reader until 3 or 4 years ago. Now I've taken breaks, I've done other things, but it's always been in there. And I've always been a reader, and I've always been good. I got good feedback from the second I laid out the cards for the first time when I was still holding the book in my hands. Like I had something that was there. And again, I'm not waxing my own car. I'm telling you that this is true, and we have to own ourselves. And that's another thing I think you need to be able to do if you want to read professionally, is you need to be able to own your talent without being an arrogant dick. There's a balancing act there. But I didn't feel ready. I didn't feel confident until 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago when I opened my shop, and people had said to me, it's probably time, if you're going to do this, to make sure you're compensated for your time. I had read for most of my reading life and didn't feel confident enough until like 4 or 5 years ago. That's a long time. It's different for everybody. I don't know that there's a right time, but I do think, like, would you hire you based purely on your reading resume is a good way to go. If someone came to you and said, do you think I'm ready to do whatever. Like, I think you obviously get to draw the line wherever you want to, but what would someone on the outside say? And it's perfectly fine to ask someone you trust. It has more to do with just the amount of time that you've been reading. It has to do, again, I think, with your ability to connect the question to the cards and come up with an answer that is satisfying. And again, by satisfying, I mean contextual, logical, realistic, and grounded in both the cards you're seeing and what you know and the question. And also just to like ultimately recognize that like being a pro doesn't mean you're a professional. There are plenty of people out there, as I said before, making money doing shit they have no business making money for. They just had the bravery to ask for it. And that's great for them. But it doesn't mean they're good at it. And it doesn't mean they're valuable. And it certainly doesn't mean that anyone thinks they're brilliant. I mean, how many people have you worked with in your day job lives, where that person kept getting promoted or was getting all the raises and they were completely inept? They just knew who to play. They knew the politics, or they knew where the bodies were buried, like being the like pro of anything doesn't equate with talent. And I guess the final thing I'll say then is you probably are not ready to read professionally until you know that in your gut, that you are a good reader aside from whether or not you're going to get paid, that you own your talent without being an arrogant prick, and that your worth as a human being and as a reader has zero to do with whether or not you're getting paid or how much you're getting paid. You have to know in your soul that like you are good without the validation of a paycheck. Oh, let's talk about validation before I close, because that's another thing. Once you have a financial relationship with someone, then the validation relationship changes. You may read for friends and they may love what you do. But the second you charge them, you become a business. And so their job isn't to validate you anymore. And in fact, if you do a bad job, they are likely to tell you, or not say anything at all. You do not get validation from clients as a paid reader often in the same way that you get them from friends. And so if you're looking to go for paid readings as a way of validating your talent, that's a bad idea, because you are creating a financial contract with someone. You're agreeing to provide a service. And if they feel you have not provided that service, they're not going to be shy about telling you, and in this day and age of Yelp and the internet, if you don't handle that well, then you may end up with like blogs about you. You know what I mean? Look at any of the kind of divination celebrities who have made choices that are not popular, and what happens to them, so just know that like the business side of things, it's not about validation. It's not, you're not going to get it all the time. There are clients out there who want to engage and will say, "Oh my God, this was right on," or "Hey, I have a question." And there are others who are just like, "Thank you for my reading. You did what I paid you for. End of relationship." And that's going to happen a lot more than you would like it to, most likely. The thing changes when you are a vendor than when you're a friend. And so if you're doing this to get validated, just know that this is you need to be able to be comfortable in your own validation as a reader, exterior from other people doing it for you, because once you have charged them money, it's no different than them going to CVS and having a quick meeting with the pharmacist. I need this medication. Are there any side effects? Great, bye. Pharmacists usually don't get told, "Oh my God, that was the best pharmacy experience I've ever had. You're such a talented pharmacist." They get a thank you, So these are all things to consider. Again, I can't tell you about the business aspect of things because that's not something I'm adept at. And I think most tarot people are not the right person to go to for that. If you're going to open a business, there's a lot to know about taxes. There's a lot to know about insurance. To give you a start, I would try to seek out, again, this book. Hopefully at some point Llewellyn will do a new edition. I really think they should. And I'm a fan of Christine Jetty's writing. this was more about like the emotional toll and the things you have to consider and just when you're ready. And I guess finally, like if you've been doing something for 6 months, it is the rare person I would say who has the right to charge money for that. I think that, I mean, for me, I would say 3 years at a minimum, honestly. And that's just like not even knowing. Because you want to build credibility. This is not, we are not a group of people who most folks find immediately credible. There is a long history of hucksters and frauds, and even projected fraud on people who are not. There is bias against business people who practice new age, divinatory, anything that isn't mainstream. Even though tarot may be becoming more mainstream, it's still not mainstream enough that people are like, oh, yeah, tarot reader, yeah, that's a great career choice. It's still viewed as something risky and still viewed as something a little like not cool. So, all of those things are things to think about. And if you are going to start charging money, you want to be able to say, if nothing else, and this may have no bearing on your skill, because I also know that there are people out there who've been reading forever and they just don't have it. That's few and far between, but they just, again, not all of us get to be Adele. Not all of us get to be someone who, like, is comfortable at karaoke. It's like, there are varying levels of talent. Some people just aren't meant to be doing certain things. I think that number is small, but it can happen. So what I'm saying is, like, experience isn't the only barometer, but like in the world we live in, it's something, And so if you want people to trust you, being able to say, I have X years of experience doing this, is a small thing that will help your credibility and certainly make it easier for you to at least draw attention from clients. So those are my thoughts on that. Hopefully this helps. If you are running a successful business and you feel like giving your tips away, feel free to leave them below for other folks. But as I said before, I think people who are really good at running businesses know that they don't give their business tips away for free. So, excuse me. Although I give all my tips away for free, so what the fuck do I know? Enjoy and have a good week.